Hey there. Thanks for joining me today. We are going to be diving a little bit into another aspect of the Cubase score editor that came with Cubase 14. And the goal here really is to uncover and demystify some of the tricky parts of working with dynamics. So when I was online the other day, I talked a little bit about articulations, some of the things that carry over, some of the things that don't, and then hopefully also offered some insights into how to deal with the things that don't come over. And I'm sorry about this little string from my ceiling fan. Let me get that out of the way. So with dynamics, it's similar insofar as there are things which are cosmetically going to be brought in when you import from Dorico into a Cubase score editor that you'll see, but the dynamics don't actually do anything. They're purely cosmetic. And I had been digging into a little bit why that is, and that's what this video is about. Why is that happening? It is by design, and also I want to offer some guidelines for resolving it, right, for overcoming it. Now, in Cubase, I will just say, because the demo it's nicer when I'm actually on screen rather than the little mini me in the bottom corner explaining an important point. In Dorico, dynamics are built into your expression maps. And so when you assign an expression map to an instrument, the instrument inherits all of the dynamic rules and properties, right? In Cubase, dynamics are not handled in the expression map. They are handled, believe it or not, because this is quite shocking, in the MIDI part, not even the MIDI track. So you cannot assign dynamics to an entire track. You can't say my violin track, MIDI or instrument, has these dynamic qualities. You can assign an expression map to an entire track in Cubase, but dynamics are actually part specific, which makes them extremely inconvenient. Means you have to do a lot of redundant work. If you've got 6 MIDI parts on the same track, you either have to glue them all together and assign dynamic properties to that whole part, or you have to copy the dynamic properties into all those individual parts. I think that's very cumbersome, but I want to explain a little bit why that is, because there is actually a rational explanation for why this happens, even though it's profoundly confusing coming from Dorico, or really any notation environment, or any environment where you're really expecting to be able to control dynamics. And that is that the Cubase dynamics is really like a wrapper around CC values. So it's, in a MIDI part, what the CC values are, CC7, CC11, CC1, all those sorts of curves we draw, the little points and so on, those are MIDI part specific. It's part of the MIDI data, the controller lanes. Dynamics in Cubase kind of wrap that up. It gives us a little bit of an interface that starts to present us with things that are maybe more familiar, like mezzo, piano, and forte markings. But really what it's doing is it's wrapping these controller lanes with this sort of dynamics personality. That's why the dynamics in Cubase is actually part of a MIDI part and not part of the track. It's not part of the expression map. It's not imposed by the expression map. It's actually just sort of a wrapper around controller lane data. So let's jump into the desktop here. Hey there, Cubase and Michael. Thank you very much for joining me today. So let's jump in here. I got this example from the other day. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going in Dorico here to add, let's say I'm going to just do something very extreme. I'm going to go with very quiet there and then very loud here, and that's because I want to demonstrate a point, okay? And it's always easier to demonstrate a point if it's extreme. Okay, so maybe I'll change that to piano so we can even hear it. But you can tell, obviously, it's not just the marcato that is making that louder. It's the double forte, right? So this is what we've got in Dorico. Now, when we import this into Cubase, what we're going to find is that we are, and let me get Cubase up and running. I decided today that I was going to actually walk you through this. I thought it would go a little further on making the point. So when we import this, let's create a new project. Actually, no, don't do that. We're going to see the dynamics in the score editor in Cubase, but it's not going to be functional in any way. It's just purely cosmetic. So if I'm in Cubase and I go up here to import Dorico project, all right, and I'm going to go down here to today's live stream, to this Dorico project. Actually, let me just make sure that that project was saved, and then load this up. And I am going to go into the same thing here. Sorry for walking you through this. I promise there won't be very many sort of delays here, but I thought if I went through this with you step by step, it would actually be a lot more instructional. So again, this is really nice. I think this maybe is part of the maintenance update in 14 point whatever, that now when you import, you get to choose the flow, which I think is pretty awesome. Okay, so we've got this violin part up here. I know it's over there somewhere. There it is. Okay, and if I open this up in my score editor, this is what I get right here. And I'm going to bring that into the lower zone so that we can look at it there. All right, let me see. I can zoom that in a little bit. So you can see that we now have these dynamic markings exactly as they were presented in Dorico. So the thing is that they're just purely dynamic. If we, well, I don't actually have an instrument set up for this. So let me go ahead and do that. So this is just loading up an instrument from yesterday, which, or not yesterday, but the last demo that I did. So I'm going to hit cancel there. Go ahead and here's to Strad violin, load that up. I think I have a user preset from the demo the other day. All right, and then I will come over here and route that to my thing there. And there we go. Okay, and we can see that nothing's changing over here. But if I were to go ahead and put the expression map on, this is from the other day, I can, let's see where that is. There it is. If I load this expression map on there, this is very simple, and this was covered in my last tutorial. You'll see that now it does switch articulations. So everything articulation-wise, because these are fundamental articulations, they do carry over and import as long as you have an expression map connected. But the dynamics aren't doing anything. So let's look at what the dynamics should be doing, right? So again, we have to look at our MIDI part because the dynamics information is all inside the MIDI part. I see there's a couple of comments here. I just want to make sure there's no questions. Yeah. Yeah, for real, adding that flow choice is super, super. I'm surprised they missed that on the first install. So what we want to do here is we're going to come down and we're going to add the dynamics lane, or articulations and dynamics lane, like so. Okay. Now I've got, you'll see that articulations have actually been placed for me because they match my, because these are very basic articulations that are common to both Cubase and Dorico. But you'll see in the dynamics lane, there's nothing. Now I could draw in dynamics to match this, right? So what we could do is bring this part up in the score editor on the right, like that, and then also have the key editor in the lower zone. So I can see, okay, I want to have a piano marking right there. So I'm going to go with piano. Let me go ahead and move this to the left so we can see both windows at the same time. Now what you see is now that I've added a piano marking, the piano is actually doubled. And that's because when I added something in the lane, it created this other one up here. Now, frustratingly, I can't delete one or the other. Even though this one here is actually the graphical one that's cosmetic, you'll notice that if I delete it, it deleted the actual dynamic that I just put in. So if you need your score from Cubase to be presentable the way that probably many of us do from Dorico. We're looking for those engraving features. Then you're going to have to delete the cosmetic dynamic marking from the score editor in Cubase and then re-add it so that you only have one. For my purposes, I'm almost never printing score editor stuff for somebody to play. So the fact that I see the duplicate symbol actually just tells me that it is actually working. So in a way, I've started to just use that as almost like a visual reminder. Oh yes, I did actually set up dynamics there. Let's go to here, and I am going to draw in another one here. And this will be double forte. All right, so what this is doing, first of all, let me just point out, you have to put your dynamics in the key editor. You have to put articulations in the key editor. If it's not in the key editor and you've only placed it in the score editor, it's just cosmetic. It's not actually doing anything. So I hope that'll change. I imagine that'll change in the future, but right now, if you don't do it in the score editor, in the key editor, then it's not going to work. So now that we've got duplicates, I can tell, okay, I definitely have dynamic information in the key editor. It's going to do something, but right now it's not going to do anything. Let's see. Right, no change. And if I were to go up here to look at my instrument, right here, you can actually see in this particular instrument the dynamics aren't changing at all. We should see a visual change there. And the reason for that is that there's no dynamics mapping. So this brings us to the next sort of topic on my list over here, which is the dynamic mapping dialog. So there's another step to adding the dynamics in the key editor, and that is mapping. This is substituting the way that expression maps work in Dorico. So in Dorico, you have to go into the expression map and you say what CCs are going to control your dynamics. CC1, CC11, is it controlled with velocity? You have to determine that on a per expression map basis. So there's nothing new really about that need to define what's driving your instrument's dynamics. Here, though, you have to do that from the key editor, and there's a little option here called the dynamics dialog or the dynamics mapping dialog. And that's going to allow us to basically set percentages for just how much velocity or how much CC11 or how much CC1 to send for piano or pianissimo or mezzo forte or whatever the dynamic is. You can set that numerically, which is actually something really nice. It's a little more flexible than what's in Dorico. We don't really get that ability to say precisely what mezzo forte is. In Cubase, you do. The disadvantage of Cubase here is that as I said earlier, the dialog, the dynamics mapping only applies to the MIDI part. It does not even apply to the whole track. So let's check out what that really means. So if we go in here, let me wrap my head around what we're trying to do. Go to the dialog or a dynamic mapping. See this little triangle down here? Again, we're in the lower lanes of the key editor. Set up dynamic mapping. Brings up this window here where we can see the percentages. Now they have a couple of range defaults here, and you'll see the percentages change based on which of these I choose. You can't set your own preset here, which is a little funky, but that's the way it is. But you see the percentages change, and you can go in and actually manually change these percentages if you really want to. And then you can decide, okay, do I want dynamics to be driven by velocity or by a MIDI CC value? Here you have three choices. The default is change velocities. Sending volume, you could do CC11, CC1, and then you could do send controller if you want to send. So this is what you would do if you wanted to send both, say, expression and CC1, which is commonly what I do in Dorico expression maps. I use primary would be CC1 and secondary dynamics in my expression map in Dorico would be CC11. You can do that here. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click OK. And now what will happen is that when we play, we do see the dynamics changing. Right, so we see that leap from quiet up to the double forte. So now these are working. And if I go in here now and I change this to, mezzo forte instead of fortissimo, then we'll see the appropriate change happen. I didn't play it long enough. Right, so now my dynamics works, but if I were to go ahead and let's find our MIDI here. If I were to go ahead and create a new MIDI part, right, and I were to create just some MIDI notes in there, and there's no dynamics, right, then when I play, there's not going to be any dynamics happening. And even if I go in here and I were to draw in a dynamics, it's not going to be respected because I actually haven't set up dynamics mapping for this particular part here. So the fact that the dynamics are handled as a wrapper for controller data is a big part of what makes it so inflexible in Cubase. And I'm sure that dates back to many, many versions ago, way before Dorico ever existed, where this was seemed like a suitable idea to the Steinberg developers. Now they're in this tricky spot where in order to redesign how dynamics are working so that they're much more flexible and maybe even rooted in expression maps as they are in Dorico, that's going to be a little bit of a steep climb for them. So let me take a look at any of the comments here. I appreciate you guys being here with me today and always glad to read ideas and comments. That's interesting that tremolo imports too. That certainly may be the case. I think some of the, I think many, at least in the documentation, this is talking about articulations importing from Dorico into Cubase. In the documentation, they use a rather ambiguous phrase that built-in articulations will port over. What that is exactly, what that includes exactly remains ambiguous, but I could imagine tremolo coming under the heading of, an essential sort of built-in articulation. Yeah, the dynamics lane in Cubase, I would agree. The fact that the dynamics is not part of the expression map, I think, is a real frustration and a real barrier to really meaningfully using this. So here's kind of my fourth item on the list here, which your comment, Michael, brings up is, when is this worth it? When should I put dynamics in? Dynamics could be handy under two circumstances. First of all your MIDI is glued into one part, so you don't have to go in and set dynamics on each individual part, right? And for me, in the case where I really just have that initial dynamic, which I always do in my compositions in Dorico, because that's appropriate in composition. If you're conveying information to a performer, their score should at very least tell them where to start. Are they starting on mezzo forte? Are they starting on piano? Telling them the basic fundamental sort of points in the composition where the dynamic should either be identified or changed. So if I only have like one dynamic at the very beginning of my project for the whole track, then it's probably worth putting it in here. You'll get more realistic playback, and it's not that hard. It's not that time consuming now that you know how to do it. If I've got complicated dynamics, I've got hairpins and I've got crescendos and dynamics are changing often, Honestly, I just don't think it's worth it. I would just spit out the audio, export the audio track from Dorico, have Dorico do all that for me, bring it into Cubase, and know that I have that. I might bring in the audio to listen, and the MIDI if I wanted to copy the MIDI to a synth or something. I do find often that I like to have the MIDI coming out of Dorico so that I can support it with synths or other sorts of instruments that I don't traditionally compose with in Dorico, but I like to use in Cubase. Then I have the MIDI there. So maybe, import the MIDI and import the audio from Dorico. So the audio's got all of those dynamics built into them. I don't think really using the dynamics in Cubase is all that worth it. I think it's a little bit of a hack in its current form. I would imagine, based on everything I can see from the development team at Cubase and Dorico, that there's a concerted effort to bring these products closer together so that ultimately, in order for them to really make dynamics serious in Cubase, they're going to have to build that into expression maps in Cubase. And if they do that, it'll be transformative. If it's an expression map based value, now you can assign it to a whole track. It's a lot less fiddly. And also it's going to lay the foundation for a cleaner import from Dorico into Cubase. So I think that's what we'll see. Yeah, very few people are using the dynamics lane. So I don't think we need to worry too much about, importing this into old projects. I hope that Dorico and Cubase imports and exports become more and more interchangeable. I see indications of that from the development team through the forum posting and just the effort to have improved. In my view, the score editor in Cubase 14 is dramatically improved. I actually am using it to compose now on a daily basis now that I've wrapped my head around some of the fundamentals. But it is a different experience from Cubase. So that's where I'm going to sign off from now. If there are questions about this topic or something related to either dynamics or the score editor, I'm diving heavily into the score editor right now. I have been for about a month and a half. If there's questions or comments, I would love to hear from everybody because I am looking for things to investigate, things to cover, maybe workflow challenges. And so please post in the comments. If you're new to the channel and you're watching this after the fact, after I've done the live stream, please do like and subscribe if you found the video helpful, because that really helps me. And I am going to put a link in the description for this and upcoming, maybe not this one, but upcoming videos for a course that I've made that is also about Dorico expression maps, because I'm trying to find ways to support my ongoing efforts with this channel. And so if that winds up helping people in the community, then I want people to know about that. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you guys next week on Tuesday and Thursday. And take care. Have a great weekend. Bye.